Welcome to the 15th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival protected by Dettol, Banega Swasth India. The festival brochure and flyer, they're both available at the information desk for you to purchase. We are delighted to introduce now the session, The Birth of a Novel. The session is also a part of the JCB Prize for Literature series. A debut novel possesses a world of potential, new voices, fresh perspectives, and a spark. What is the weight of a literary debut? How does it come into being? Lindsay Pereira, Rijula, Shabir Ahmad Mir, and Daribha Lyndem discuss the experiences of first-time authors. May I please now invite our panel on the stage as I introduce you. Please. And a loud round of applause for our panel today. Lindsay Pereira, who's going to be joining us virtually, as you can see, is a journalist and editor. He holds a PhD in literature for his work on gender attitudes implicit in 19th-century Indian fiction. He was co-editor of the anthology Women's Voices, published by Oxford University Press, and his first novel, Gods and Ends, was shortlisted for the 2021 JCB Prize for Literature and Tata Literature Live First Book Award for Fiction. Rijula Das's debut novel, A Death in Shonagachi, won the Tata Lit Live First Book Award and was longlisted for the JCB Prize in 2021. It is forthcoming as Small Deaths in the USA and the World in June 2022 by Amazon Crossing. Das is a recipient of the 2019 Michael King Writers Center residency in Auckland and the 2016 Dastan Award for a short story, Notes from a Passing. Her short story, The Grave of the Heart Eater, was longlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize in 2019. Shabir Ahmad Mir is a poet and writer based in Pulwama, Jammu Kashmir. He's the author of The Plague Upon Us. Daribha Lyndem is a writer and civil servant from Shillong, whose debut novel, Name, Place, Animal Thing, was recently shortlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature. Lyndem was named one of the more promising writers of 2021 and beyond by the digital magazine Feminism in India and made it to the list of best summer reads of 2020 by Vogue India. Her reviews have featured in The Hindu, The Caravan, and First Post, among others. Our moderator today, Karuna Ezara Parikh, is a poet and writer, former television anchor, and model. Her work has appeared in Vogue, The Wire, India Today, and Tehelka, amongst others. Parikh's novel, The Heart Asks Pleasure First, was published in 2020, and her first book of poems, Where Stories Gather, was published in 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel today, please welcome them with a large round of applause.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for making it for the last panel of the day. Hi, guys. How are you doing? Congratulations on your nominations. As you heard, they were all nominated for the JCB Prize. And I've just finished reading all their novels. Hi, Lindsay. I hope you can see us, hear us. Hi. And I've just finished reading these 4 books, and I found them absolutely fantastic. But the thread for me that tied, that sort of ran across your novels and tied them together for me right at the start was actually geography. Because each one of your novels occupies very wholly one area or state or locality of this country, and they're 4 very different areas. And I stopped to wonder while reading the last one. I said, oh, this is something that runs across them. And I wonder how much geography was responsible for pushing you to write these stories. I was thinking perhaps we could start with you, Lindsay, because the big bad city of Bombay, as it's still called in your novel.
It was important. But it was less important than what it is I was trying to do. When I decided that I had a novel I wanted to write, I was more interested in what a proximity does to people. I think India is full of these really tight-knit communities. Some of them are bound by religious beliefs. Some of them are bound by economic necessity. But the minute a community like this comes into being, it also gives rise to petty resentments, anger, jealousy that I believe are common to all of the people who happen to live in communities like these. It happened to be set in a very specific part of Bombay because that is where I was born and raised. It is a part of Bombay I am extremely fond of, despite the bleak nature of the novel. And I believe that while geography was important when it comes to creating the setting in which these characters resided temporarily, it wasn't the most important thing for me. But I can see why you would pick that as a common thread. It is important in general, but for this novel, it wasn't the primary motive behind why I decided to write Gods and Ends.
Stan, I like what you said about proximity, and the other person I think on this panel who explores that really well is Rijula. You also look at a community that lives in very close quarters, a marginalized community as well. And for me, the geography in your book was very interesting because you live in New Zealand and the book is based in Bengal. How did you do that? Especially because I think you were writing it toward the last few years of writing were pandemic years, right? So how did you do that and how did you conjure up this Bengal? And I want to know more about that.
Yeah, I think I wrote that book because I was not living in India. I wrote the book in UK, Singapore, and New Zealand. So the book is entirely been written in 3 different continents, and none of which is India. But at heart, my book is a book about Kolkata and a book about Shonagachi.
And I live in Kolkata, and I can tell you it's extremely evocative and it's very authentic.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And it takes place in, which is why I think the book doesn't have a main character to me. I mean, I know that people latch on to these two the main story gets told by them, but it is about a very big community, which is why I knew that the book needed to be polyphonic at many levels, because life in Calcutta it's never any one person's story. Like you're going your way, and then somebody will bump into your life, and your narrative will become other people's narrative, and that's how we live. But I think, personally speaking, that book is a love letter to Kolkata, and it has a lot of excesses that comes purely from love. Like there's lots of scenes that don't further the story, but I didn't want to cut them out because I think I wrote that book because I was missing home, and I couldn't go back. So writing the book was giving myself a Kolkata that I sort of lost.
That's really beautiful. And ironically, Shabir, you wrote about Kashmir, which is your home, and Rijula says she wrote about somewhere she couldn't go back to. And I think for many Kashmiris, writing about Kashmir is the only way to escape it as well at times. Was that part of your writing? How much did that push the story you told? And your book, it is a very dark book. It's beautiful, but it's very dark as well. Again, about a very close-knit community and how incidents can be seen from different angles over there in that tightness.
See, the thing about being a Kashmiri right now is that you can't escape it, no matter what you do. I mean, as a writer, as an artist, it's not just about the geography. The Kashmir as a concept, the time-space continuum that we can call Kashmir right now, that occupies almost a black sun-like aura in the imaginative horizons of any artist. No matter how much you push it, you don't want to write about it, you want to escape it, but it will eventually pull you to itself. You can't just escape it. Even if it's a conscious decision to write something that should not be touching the Kashmir, you want to just break free. But at the end of the day, if you have lived through all those trauma, everything from last so many years, somehow it will seep in. So that's one thing. And another thing is to consciously write on that, and that's again a problematic thing because the Kashmir, it has been almost pigeonholed into some narratives. I mean, there are narratives on this side, narratives on that side, even maybe some narratives that try to trade the middle path. But the thing is so muddled, that's one of the attempts of my book to present that chaos. You can't find a way out of that. So no matter what you do, Kashmir will always occupy a space, a narrative space, as well as an imaginative space. And I think I just couldn't do it, even if I tried to.
And for you, Daribha, you said you grew up in Shillong, and your book is based there as well. Coming back to the question of geography, you no longer live in Shillong. So how did it feel to write about that? You're writing also about, it's a bit of a coming of age book as well. It's about a young woman finding herself and finding her path in Shillong. And it's told through these beautiful vignettes. In which you paint such a beautiful picture and also such a tragic picture in some ways, again, of a community that is very marginalized and misunderstood, and a community with opposing forces in it as well. So how did you work through your memories of childhood to write this book? That's done so extremely well. Everybody loves your novel. It's amazing.
Like Rijula said, as Rijula has done, she wrote her novel when she was in 3 different countries. So you basically have time and distance, emotional distance, physical distance, mental distance from this place you grew up in. And that gives you a sort of perspective, to understand the place you grew up in, the place that you spend your formative years in. That distance allows you to introspect and see things as how they were. Of course, memory will always be tinged with, there will always be something that will tinge it, but there are certain things you will always remember. So I don't think I would have been able to write the book if I was still living in Shillong. I think when writers write about a sad moment in their lives, they don't think about writing it when they're living it. They only think about it when there's a certain distance, a time distance in the terms of time, space. That kind of distance allows them to maybe understand things in a more holistic fashion. And I think that was what helped me write my book, being away from the place. And I think in the novel, Shillong is a character in its own right. And there are different characters in the book, but Shillong runs throughout the novel.
Shillong is the thing that ties them all together, and their stories together.
It ties them all together, and I think that was important because, Shillong, the Northeast as a whole, is considered so far removed from the rest of India.
Yeah.
And I think I wanted people to see that, a lot of us when we were growing up, we did the same things. We played the same games. We ate the same food. There were so many things that were so similar. So there is nothing to feel alienated about. There's no us and them. We're all we in the way we grew up. We all had the same kind of worries and fears and the same kind of desires. So I wanted to sort of bring people closer together by removing these barriers that is a geographical location. But at the same time, we cannot say it's the same place. There are so many things that make Shillong different from the rest of the country. So I wanted to bring people closer by showing the similarities so they could understand the disparate elements of my city.
And I think you've done that really well. It really does come across what you're trying to do. It comes across very clearly when one's reading the book, I think. You touch on the Christian community there as well. And Lindsay, you do that as well in your book. And what I found so fascinating while reading your books sort of back to back was that we're talking about Christian communities, but they're so very different, and these books are so very different, and the cultures are so different. And there is a tendency in India to lump these things all together, right? And to not actually look at the differences and celebrate the differences as well. Lindsay, you spoke about the community and how that pushed the need to write the book rather than, as you said, the geography. And the little community you create in Obrigado Mansion, it's tragic, it's hilarious as well. How much, you said the stories pushed you to write the book. How much is true to life? How much is, I was really fascinated. Does the mansion exist? Did it ever exist? How much of it is a figment of imagination?
A lot of it is fiction. The dialect is real. I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that I'd get the nuances right. I had specific dialects and turns of phrase that I associated with specific characters to help me tie them all together. So many of these characters living together, and I was aware that the possibility of a reader not being able to keep track was quite high. So I used little linguistic tweaks now and again to try and make sure that there was a thread. A lot of it was based on people and ideas and customs that I did encounter. A lot of the sentiment, a lot of the way that these characters speak, the anger that they bring, the economic realities, they were all real. The well was real. There were and still are mansions like Obrigado in Bombay. I remember someone pointing out, when they were reading the book, and they said it's absolutely impossible that someone in Bombay could rent a place like this for that amount of money, even in the 70s. And that's not true.
I was going to ask.
Oh no, that's not true. You can still rent a place in Bombay for that kind of money because of the Rent Control Act. So a lot of people in some parts of Bombay, and surprisingly, well-heeled parts of Bombay, do manage to get away with rents that are criminal because of the Rent Control Act. I grew up in a place that, and the rent we paid was a little over 200, if I recall. So all of that was real. I grew up in a fairly poor household. It was a really small room, and the money we paid was real. The people paying those kinds of rents were real. So a lot of that just wasn't fiction. Maybe the people who read it have not been exposed to that kind of poverty or the kind of rents that these characters are paying, but it was all real.
Have you felt that your community and your story has been unrepresented in literature in India? Is that why you felt you need to write this story? And that goes for the rest of you as well. And I know it's not your community, but the community you write about, Rijula. Back to you, Lindsay. Did you feel that? Has it felt underrepresented?
I believe it's misrepresented. A lot of the problems that come from how we perceive communities across India, not just the Christian community, has a lot to do with how the biggest cultural force in India, which is cinema, chooses to represent us.
And you mentioned that in the book as well at one point, I think.
I do, yes. In the 70s, the 70s created and trotted out these stereotypes for what the Punjabis were supposed to be like, and what the Parsis were supposed to be like, and what the Muslims and the Christians were supposed to be like. And those stereotypes have been so entrenched in how we look at these communities that our jokes and our memes today continue to reflect that set of stereotypes. And I wanted to walk back from each of them and try and look at how some of these stereotypes come into being. So I wouldn't say it's underrepresented as much as misrepresented. A lot of the books that inadvertently feature these communities tend to repeat and reinforce these stereotypes, and I wanted to move away from that.
Shabir, the same question to you. Some of the biggest books about Kashmir are written by non-Kashmiris. Even though they're very empathetic about the situation in Kashmir, they are not written by Kashmiris. So did you also feel to some extent that, because it is a first novel, were you pushed by that? Did you feel that you want a Kashmiri voice representing a Kashmiri novel and a Kashmiri story? And as I said, the rest of you, please feel free to jump in and answer that as well based on your...
I have written about this in detail. I mean, this question of representing people, that's very problematic. I mean, it's Arundhati Roy, she put it so beautifully. There is too much of good blood in Kashmir right now for good literature. Too much of blood for good literature. So the problem as a writer you face is, if you claim you are representing your people, let's say, I am writing a story that must reflect my people's aspirations or whatever the political situation or social equation, whatever it is. But the problem is, if that true representation, if it strikes against my aesthetics, sometimes you have to compromise. So what do? The problem there arises is, okay, I am claiming I am a representative of Kashmir. So is my work, is my fiction a work of art, or is it just mere propaganda, or should I say polemic? That is the problem that every author right now in Kashmir faces. So when somebody goes on and claims that, okay, I am representing the real Kashmir, that for me becomes a kind of joke. Because if you want to really represent Kashmir, that is out there.
Also, I think that's, just for those of you who haven't read his book, it's called The Plague Upon Us, and it deals with one story from the view of 4 different characters. And I think you showed through that as well, that who is a Kashmiri and which story is true. And without giving away anything about the end, I think you actually show that through your book as well, right?
Yeah, so that's one aspect, that who gets to tell the story of Kashmir. Then the second aspect is, as an artist, what are you representing? Are you just claiming you are a Kashmiri and putting in the background your credentials as an artist, or are you putting the spotlight on your credentials as an artist and pushing back your identity as a Kashmiri? The compromise between two is a constant tussle, and I mean, it's a very fine line to balance and walk upon.
But I don't know if that's just because of Kashmiri. I think every artist goes through that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Sorry, I wanted to ask you the same thing, about representation. And was that something that pushed you to write this book? Did you feel that you had not seen your community represented in literature in India?
That's a burden, no? Being a representative of an entire community. I don't think I set out to do that. I set out to write a story, and it happened to be set in my hometown. The thing about writing about Meghalaya or anywhere in the Northeast or anywhere that has, the Afspar looming over your head, there's always this thing where people gatekeep who gets to write about the Northeast. What's the right way to write about the Northeast? People from the Northeast think outsiders are not the right people. Outsiders think they want to write about the Northeast, but they perhaps don't do all their research, and then Northeastern people get irritated by that. But I feel that if anybody is writing about the Northeast, as long as they do justice and they do their research, I don't think I'm anyone to gatekeep, because to set out to write about a community with the hope of representing it, I don't know, that's cause for trouble.
That's ambitious.
I don't think I want to set out to do that. I set out to write a story, and if people felt they could relate because I was writing about the Northeast, or if a Khasi person felt represented or felt at one with the book because they could understand what I was going through, that is a plus. I did, of course, because I am tied to the place I grew up in, the place I was born in, I cannot help but write about it. I can't extricate my identity from where I am. So that would be impossible to write as not a Khasi person.
I see Rijula nodding very vigorously, so then the question's coming to you, especially when she said that, I didn't set out to represent anyone, I just set out to write a story. Would you agree with that? And you were writing about something that, it's complicated, right? Because you're writing about prostitution in India, you're writing about the sex trade, and, it's such a delicate thing. And again, you've examined it from so many different angles in your book. You've sort of gone through the layers of it. So did you set out with the ambition to represent anybody, or was it just, this is a great story and I'm going to see what I can do with it?
God, no, I didn't set out to represent anybody. I think the question of representation is something that comes after the fact. I can't speak for everybody, but I would find it quite incredible if somebody sat down and before they wrote down their first sentence, they said, right, I'm going to write this representative book. There's a lot of freedom and terror and joy in that first draft when you have no idea where you're going, where this is going at all. And I think it's important as a writer to give yourself that space to enjoy that terror for as long as you can. and that usually lasts for the entire first draft and a bit of the second draft. And I think that's when you start seeing what the book is and what you're representing and what it's ending up representing. For me, and I think representation is interesting as a concept as well, because mine is not an own voices novel, which I am very aware of. And then I think that it's not that you can't write a book about people who don't share the same experience as you, but it definitely means that your responsibility to do it in as authentic and sensitive and empathetic way as you possibly can is tenfold. It increases tenfold. So once I realized that this book was going to be this book, because I didn't know what book I was writing, I was just writing. Then you go back and you say, am I doing the best I can? And though it is about sex work and shonagachi, and there's years of research, because I did my PhD in relationship between sexual violence in India and public space, and how we understand women and their bodies in public spaces and how we allow them to use it. So there's years of research that's gone into it, but that's just so that I could do justice to what I was doing, but it was not for representation.
Yeah. It sounds, hearing all of you speak about it, it sounds a lot like, I think as writers we begin writing, and it's almost like the writing acts as the compass to the heart eventually, right? And sort of points us in the direction of what matters, which is really beautiful. I want to move, because you guys have naturally gone this way, I want to move from the political stuff to the personal a little more. For each of you, this was a first novel. How long did you guys take to write these incredible drafts? How long did the terror of the first draft last? The wild ride of it? Stories about putting it together. Since this panel is called The Birth of a Novel, I wanted to ask about that. Everyone's looking very terrified now. Lindsay, why don't you go first? I never know.
I wrote it in 2017, and the fact that we're discussing it in 2022 says a lot about how difficult it was to get someone to accept, the possibility of it existing. I sent it out to a number of people. I had no idea if it had any literary merit or if it could be published at all. And it took me 2 years to find an agent, Kanishka Gupta, who then decided to send it out to a number of people. And I think Gods and Ends wouldn't have existed without Elizabeth Kuruvilla at Penguin. I'm always very grateful to her, because I think she looked at the book. I had 2 drafts, and I was quite satisfied with the second one, which is not the case of what I did after that. But with Gods and Ends, I knew what I wanted to do. So it was that the writing process was fairly painless, because I wrote it very quickly. I had written it in my head.
You're not making yourself popular here, Lindsay. Everybody is like, oh, he had just 2 drafts.
Yes. Only with Gods and Ends, if it makes you feel better. That it's always been painful since and before that. But with Gods and Ends, I had a very clear idea of what it is I wanted to say. But like I said, it didn't mean that the terror abated in any way, because I had no idea if anyone wanted to publish it. It went to a number of publications. A number of people rejected it within 24 hours. I don't know how one does that, but I suppose some agents and some publishers are more perceptive than others, probably. But eventually it did get published, and the terror is real, though, I will say that.
And I hear from a little bird that you are well on your way with your second novel, and I look forward to reading that.
4 drafts, yes, but it's done. But 4 drafts.
You're working at an incredible pace.
No, it's done. It's done. It's the 4th draft was. Thanks. Well, again, we don't know if it's ever going to be published, and maybe in 2031, when it does, come out, we can talk about it then.
Well, I hope there are publishers fighting over it. What about you, Rijula? I know you took, I was reading your acknowledgements, and it said you took 7 years, and I was thrilled because I took about 10 years to write mine, and I said, oh, here's someone who's getting close to that number. So tell me about those 7 long years of terror and joy.
Yeah, I feel like I should balance out Lindsay because it sounds like it was a really good ride. So I'm going to tell you my story, but please do not try this at home. This is not a good way to get your book out there in the world. So I started writing this novel, and there's basically 2 novels at this point. So one version of this novel exists called Other Town, and it's the same characters, same universe, completely different plot line that I wrote first. And that went really fast. Like, I think I wrote that in like 2 months, 2 to 3 months it took me. Mind you, I didn't do anything. I just swam and I wrote the book. That's all I did. I basically didn't eat that whole time. And I wrote that book, and that was done. I hated the book. I never wanted to look at it again. Like about 6 months later, I was like, well, I've written a book. Maybe I should try and sell it. So I contacted Kanishka. Kanishka sold it. And then it was like done, like very fast. And I was like, it's a horrible book. Why would anybody want to read this? And then my editor, Tista at Picador, she sent me back these very beautiful notes on the book, and she loved it. And we were just going through the first developmental edits. And I said, look, I hate this book. I'm not going to live the rest of my life with my name on this cover. So give me some time. And then I changed the book from the 3rd chapter onwards. So it's the same characters, same universe, completely different plot. So my editor
Tista's like, I bought a different book. You can't do this. I've already bought it.
My editor is the saint in this story, because she would have been completely within her rights to say, this is not the book I bought. Like, I was like, I'm sorry, I like this one better. Do you want this? So basically, I rewrote the entire book, which took about 7 drafts, 3 years. The pandemic years, basically 2 years more like. And then now there is a book.
And it's a fantastic book.
Thank you.
I want to tell you all that I hadn't read her book, and I was, people were saying it's really good. And then my mother calls me, and my book has just come out as well. And my mother's like, I've read the best book I've read this year. And I was like, oh, really? Which one? And she named your book, of course. And it is fantastic. Please read it. I haven't read a book about prostitution in India like that. And I think you handle it really, really well. What about you? How long did it take you? This is the question no one wants to answer.
I think I'm going to tip the scales towards Lindsay's side and say it took me 3.5 months to write it. It's a short novel.
There's silence in the audience. All the aspiring writers in this audience are just sitting there gobsmacked at this point.
I think I think because the nature of how I got my job, which requires me to just focus, so that kind of maybe trained me to just focus and write this book. So
Are you a very disciplined writer? Do you write sort of every day? I'm not, so.
No, I don't write every day, but when I feel like now I have a set idea, then I'm like a woman possessed. Then I feel like I must finish this or I won't be able to sleep. So writing the book took 3.5 months, but editing the book and getting it out took 2 years. So it was difficult because I felt that, oh, I finished writing it so fast. Why isn't this getting done faster? And, sending it to publishers was difficult because I'm nobody. And they don't want to publish someone who hasn't been published before. Yeah. But unless you publish me, then I'll never be published. And I can't approach you again. Yeah. So someone publish me.
It's a wonderful catch-22.
Yes. So
and eventually you were published by Zuban, which was a huge triumph for them. Yeah. And I think they produced your book also with a lot of love and care. And I think it meant a lot to them to have it, right?
Yeah, I really appreciated that. They didn't, they went on the material and not on how I wasn't published yet, and I really appreciate that. And a lot of publishers need to give first-time authors a chance and not look at how many followers we will have and X, Y, Z. I mean, look at that as well. I mean, good for you, you have plenty of money, but we'd like first-time writers would like some,
good
you know,
literature is good literature.
Yeah. So that was a more difficult process, and don't hate me for this, but.
Shabir, 2 weeks? Did you write your book in 2 weeks? Is that what we're going to hear?
No, not 2 weeks, but I would have allowed if it had been only 2 weeks. Actually, the actual process of writing, the physical process of writing, it was 3 months. I mean, I am highlighting this word again and again, the actual, the physical part of writing it. Otherwise, the book was in making, I believe, for years. I mean, I have drawn on my memories, on the history, on the stories, the oral folklore, etc. So that has been a lifetime of work, but the actual process of writing was 3 months. So,
at the time, it was very hard to communicate with people in Kashmir, and there were many internet lockdowns and shutdowns and things like that going on as well, right? While you were editing your book, how did that affect the process?
Oh, that was a headache. I mean, my editor at Hachette, Palomi, it was all because of her. Otherwise, it would have been physically impossible. I mean, for some months, we were totally out of contact. Then I had my cousin, he was studying outside in Delhi. So I had to pass on my email, password, ID, etc. to him. So he would, whenever we would, after a month or two, the landlines were restored. So he would call me, okay, you have received a mail this today and they're asking for this thing. So then I would go on and speak over the phone and tell him, okay, you have to do things like that. And then there came a time when it had to be me. I mean, he couldn't do it. So by then, about 3-4 months later, the situation was a little bit better. We could move out and the landlines and mobile communication had been restored. So I moved out for a couple of weeks and did most of editing then. And then again, it took 2 months, and I let Palomi know whenever she needs me, she could drop a message, and I will try to go somewhere and do things.
That sounds really tedious.
I mean, that was more bitter and more harsher than writing the actual novel. I mean, there were times when I just wanted to give up. I mean, it was too... I would drop a message, right? She would be asking for something till I read that message and responded back. She would have moved on. It would have skipped her mind. And then this whole process was like, it was like really discouraging. I didn't want to write anymore.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that sounds actually very, very painful.
Someone believed in your book, so that's the main thing, right? Someone believed in your book enough to that makes up for all of it.
But that is a story altogether, different story. I mean, that was after I finished writing it. For a year, I tried everywhere. I mean, whatever email ID, whatever contact number I could get, I kept on dropping queries. Okay, I have this, that, the usual routine, synopsis, those 3 chapters. And by the end of about a year, it had become more of a habit. I didn't expect anything. It was just like at the end of the day, I would just open up my mailbox and just type the same thing again if I found some new ID and just mail it. And I didn't expect there would be any response. It was only, about a year or a year and a half later that somebody showed some practical interest in the book.
So eventually, and now we're coming to the end of the session, eventually for first novels especially, your books have just done so incredibly well. So congratulations again to you guys. I wanted to talk a little bit about the response to your books, how that felt, because first-time novelists, I think we all dream of that, but it doesn't happen for everyone. It's very rare, in fact. So I do think you guys have been exceptionally lucky, not without credit. It's so well-deserved. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that, just whichever one of you wants to go first, because I thought we could end with a bit of joy.
I would like to take the lead on that. I mean, the response to my book has been very fascinating and surprising at the same time. Surprising in the sense, the people or the people of a particular bent of mind, a political standing, I expected certain things from, only at my personal level. But the response has been very sort of strange. People that I expected they won't be believing in this book, they would be ripping it apart, they were appreciating it. And people that I certainly felt, okay, they might do this line, or maybe I am favoring a little bit, I'm leaning a bit towards them. But the things that came, later, they are actually after me. You have done a great disservice and all that. I mean, it has been surprising for me too, how the work speaks to people. And that in itself is a revelation. You can't control anything. You can't control a narration. You can't control your art.
What about in Kashmir? What about in Kashmir? Is this, the response you're talking about, is this in Kashmir as well?
Yeah,
Yeah?
particularly in Kashmir.
Oh,
I mean, from
particularly.
outside Kashmir, things have been mostly positive, but within Kashmir, there has been a bit of, mixed signals. There are people who are appreciating it. Okay, it's a good book, it's a very well-written book, but it's not about Kashmir. You are not representing us. Though I have never claimed so, and I have never asked to be considered a representative of anybody. But there are people, who you practically think, okay, this will really, really get them angry. But they are coming in support, and that's really something that I can't still reconcile with.
Yeah. Lindsay, did you find a similar response? Like, how was the response within your own community? Because, it's not always a pretty portrait that you paint. It's very personal and at times quite dark. Have you had any backlash, or has it mainly been people talk about how wonderful your book is?
No, I suppose a backlash would occur if people from the Christian community would read more. And luckily, that hasn't happened in the past 100 odd years. My mother didn't like it, and I don't know if she's come around. But the weirdest thing was, I remember standing with Daribha at the JCB Prize ceremony. And I told her, I said, Daribha, we need to go out because our books are being flashed onto the side of this building. And I dragged her out to look at it. And I think we both stood there for a bit, and we saw the covers of our books. They were being projected onto the side of the building. That was a very surreal moment because I didn't expect that to happen when I was writing the book. But in general, it has been fairly. Everyone's been fairly kind. No one said, horrible things about the book, which is pretty much all I could ask for, I suppose.
That's wonderful. Which one of you? Because we have time for this and then perhaps some questions from the audience as well.
No, since Lindsay mentioned, we were at the ceremony and he said, did you see the flashing of books outside? I said, no, I didn't see. So we run out midway through, put our canapes down, run out and see. And that's really exciting to see that. Because for me, it took so long for the book to come out because the pandemic hit as soon as the book was supposed to come out in April of 2020. And then it didn't because of the pandemic. And
I think there was a lot of mix-up with yours. I remember I tried to order it and I remember getting a coupon or something.
Yeah,
it was months later.
It was very disheartening because first the ebook came out and then finally the final copy came out, and it was just for the first time author I said, okay, is this how it's going to be? Is it going to be this tough? Especially since you're expecting things to be faster. Maybe I'm just impatient or something, but so when the book came out initially, so I mean, as a writer, you have expectations that a few people will read the book. And luckily, when it was nominated for the JCB Prize, of course, a lot more people did read the book, and that was great. And then I started to worry, oh no, maybe I should have written something better. I wanted to change bits of it. And I think someone told me that once you've written a book, you should just leave it. It's not yours anymore. It's out there. Yeah. So I had to contend with worrying about what the book could have been, but I don't think that's a healthy way to look at it. But yes, it was really nice that people were reading the book, and a lot of people messaged me and told me that, oh, it's so nice to see in the Northeast in a different light. And because people don't really understand anything. Like, for example, when I was in college, there were these two men in the train, and they were having a discussion, and one man said to the other, they were going to Guwahati, and one man said to the other, oh, I think I could take a trip down to Shillong, because I hear it's really beautiful. And the other guy said, don't go to Shillong, they behead people like us there. So there's a lot of misconceptions about Shillong and the Northeast in general. And I had a lot of people message me and tell me that, oh, I didn't know, we had so many similarities. But in Shillong, again, like I said, there's a lot of gatekeeping. Some people liked it. Some people wanted me to write about something else. Yeah. And I don't think the book was about that. And I don't think that I am an authority to write about the insurgency or, that is for someone better equipped. So I'm just glad that the JCB was able to push the book so far forward, more than I could ever imagine, and I'm quite grateful for that, very grateful.
Rijula?
I don't know actually, because living in New Zealand, where the book is not available at the moment, it's going to be, they're going to get the US World Edition. It's coming out in June, and that one's got a different title. It's called Small Deaths. So now this same story that I wrote exists under 3 titles, all of which is, it's a bit surreal, but it's not available in the country that I live in. And I'm quite invested in the literary community in New Zealand. And they all know about the book, and they keep asking me, when are we going to get your book? And so for the last 6 years, I've been saying soon. So that's a very surreal experience. But because the book came out in the pandemic years, because I live in New Zealand, because every single event I've done before today has been virtual, I actually don't know what the response to my book is, apart from the reviews which I read and the other things like it being bought by another publisher, and there's a series in the works right now. So I'm working on the show Bible that's happening. So there's a couple of translations in French and Italian. So there are these like little markers from the market that says, this is good. But I mean, I don't have a real perception of it. It feels very technologically mediated. Like anything I hear about my book, it comes from a screen. Like I'm reading it on a screen.
I'm not sure that has so much to do with living in New Zealand as much as it has to do with the pandemic, because I think the rest of us would say the last few years were the same. But please enjoy these days over here and enjoy meeting your readers, because so many people, including my mother, have told me how fantastic your book is. Congratulations again to all of you, not just for writing these books, and I know how hard a first novel is, and for putting them out there and having them find their way, and the nomination and all that, but also for, as we said, doing it during a pandemic, which I think made it so much harder. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. I already see a hand up there. There's a mic, yeah.
Hi, this question is for Rijula. Rijula, my name is Chintan. I loved your book. I reviewed it as well. I'm interested in hearing about what made you depict sex work as an economic activity. That comes across pretty strongly in the book. Instead of looking at it only through the moral lens, you talk about how demonetization affects the lives of sex workers. And remember this character called Shefali in particular, who says that sex workers who service clients in hotels are like doctors making house calls. Could you talk about your journey with that character in particular?
Thank you, Chintan. Thanks for your kind words. Yes, so sex work is at its heart a job. It's what people. If there was no money involved, very few people in the world would do it. Primary reason people do it is economic, and there is a lot of discourse around the idea of sex work around the world, and better minds than mine have worked around it and researched it. But primarily, what's happening there, I guess what we're referring to, just to distill that, is that people are saying that there is, one part of the activism within sex work by sex workers is to give sex workers the legitimacy of labor, which means that then they will have labor rights, which, so basically if an electrician can be an electrician and may educate their children, so the child can be something else through their profession, through being an electrician. The argument by sex workers is that why can't we do that? Why is this job of all jobs in the world the one that you have to leave, but you cannot do the activism to get better rights and better life conditions. So this is not coming from me. This is not something I've said. This is just what is happening in the world, by people concerned who are in this world. And that's a line that comes from Shefali Madam. She, a figment of my imagination, but it is the sort of conversation you can hear in Shonagachi, because what people in Kolkata and the rest of India do is bring humor to lives. We very, we can laugh at things, we joke about everything. Laughter is a constant thing in our lives. In many parts of India, doesn't matter how your life is. And Shefali Madam and Shonagachi is a bit like that as well, and people are always cracking jokes. And we also think in metaphors a lot, like Indians do think, like, so there's always a simile, there's always a metaphor. So that's where that line comes from. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more? Okay, I don't think we do, but you can meet the authors outside. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you guys so much. Thanks, Lindsay, for joining online.
Thank you.